I don't even have an introduction for this morning's lesson. Last week we took a look at Samuel's address to Israel, his reminder that they were to serve the Lord their God, his reminder of what God had done for them in the past. This morning, as we look at chapter 13, the title lesson, as Brother Dan said, is The Lord Rejects Saul. Some of the most well-known statements of Samuel are in these verses that we'll attempt to look at this morning. I don't know that we'll get all three chapters. In fact, my guess is we probably won't. But some very familiar verses in here, and very important words for us to keep in the forefront of our mind as we try to serve God. We are in 1 Samuel chapter 13, and if we get far enough along, chapter 14 and chapter 15 also. Let's go ahead and start. If somebody would read chapter 13, verses 1 through 4. All right, so as we begin chapter 13, verse 1 reads, Saul reigned 1 year, and when he had reigned 2 years over Israel, Saul chose him 3,000 men of Israel, whereof 2,000 were with Saul in Michmash and in Mount Bethel, and 1,000 were with Jonathan in Gibeah of Benjamin, and the rest of the people he sent every man to his tent. Now, when we go back and look at earlier verses or earlier chapters, you'll note that when Saul put out a call for the people to come and go to battle, what size army did they raise? Do you recall? It's 300,000. Now, as we look this morning, and this is early in Saul's reign, verse 1 is kind of an odd verbiage. Saul reigned 1 year, and when he reigned 2 years over Israel. The translations on that vary, but needless to say, the bottom line is that about 2 years in Saul's reign, we have this occurrence here, these events. He reigned for a total of 40 years. So again, very early in his reign. He chose among him 3,000 men of Israel. 2,000 were with him, and 1,000 was with Jonathan. Where was Saul located? He was located in Michmash, and Mount Bethel with the 2,000, and then Jonathan had 1,000 of them in Gibeah, which was the hometown of Saul. The rest of the people, he sent every man to his tent. Verse 2 finishes up. As we go on to verse 3, Jonathan smote the garrison of the Philistines that was in Geba, and the Philistines heard of it. And Saul blew the trumpet throughout all land, saying, Let the Hebrews hear. And all Israel heard say that Saul had smitten the garrison of the Philistines, and that Israel also had an abomination with the Philistines. And the people were called together after Saul to Gilgal. So verse 3 and 4 tells us what? We have first the action of Jonathan, and that was, he smote the Philistines. Verse 3 tells us that specifically. As a result, Saul blows the trumpet throughout the land, saying, let all the Hebrews hear. And what did they hear in verse 4? Yeah, that Saul had smitten a garrison of the Philistines. Now, do you think that Jonathan cared about that? No. But what's it an indication of? Yeah. Evidently, Saul was beginning to feel kind of comfortable in his role as king and sort of liked that people looked at him and praised him with accomplishments that were made. All Israel heard say that Paul had smitten a garrison of the Philistines, that Israel also had an abomination with the Philistines, and the people were called together after Saul to Gilgal. So Saul had moved from Michmash to Gilgal. And verse 5 says, and the Philistines gathered themselves together to fight with Israel. These numbers, 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and people as the sand which is on the seashore in multitude. And they came up and pitched in Michmash, that's where Saul was, eastward from Bethaven. Now, compare the size of the armies, Israel and the Philistines, there is no comparison at all. Saul had 2,000 men with him, and then Jonathan had another 1,000. They speak here of 30,000 chariots alone. And the chariots were, when numbered, were always far, far less than the fighting men. And even the charioteers. 6,000 horsemen, cavalry. Again, that was 3 times the size of the entire military that Saul had under him directly. And the people as the sand on the seashore in multitude. They came up, they pitched in Michmash eastward from Bethaven. What brought this about? Well, I imagine Jonathan defeating the garrison there had embarrassed the Philistines, and so they weren't going to be satisfied with just sending a small contingent to do battle against the armies of Israel. They were going to show full force. They were going to show who was in charge. And so they sent their massive army after them. And it shouldn't surprise us because typically, how does Satan react when God's people win a victory? He tries to overwhelm. He sends his temptations and trials and tribulations to us in such fashion as to immediately tear us down and discourage us. And we have to be careful. You know, as we continue to look here, we're going to see that it has a vast effect on Israel. Verses 6 and 7, it says, when the men of Israel saw that they were in a strait, for the people were distressed, then the people did hide themselves in caves, and in thickets, and in rocks, and in high places, and in pits. And some of the Hebrews went over Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. As for Saul, he was yet in Gilgal, and all the people followed him trembling. What was the situation in Israel? Yeah, why? Yeah. Because of the huge army, because of the vast odds, because of the things that they saw and they were facing. To a certain extent, Peter had that same result when he was walking on the water, didn't he? What happened? Take your eyes off the Lord. You look instead at the storms around about you, and what happens? Matthew 14:30 says, but when he saw the wind boisterous, he was afraid, and beginning to sink, he cried, saying, Lord, save me. And it's our natural fleshly inclination to look at those odds that are against us. For us, here, small work in St. Louis County, in a metropolitan area of 3.5 million people, we look at the odds around us, and what do we say? Well, there's not much we can do. But we can. How? With the Lord. With the Lord. But too oftentimes, we just sort of go off in caves and we hide. Or, we may stay with a leader, but we're in trembling. Fear overtakes us. Romans 8:31 says, "What shall we then say to these things? If God be for us, who can be against us?" When we are walking according to God's will in our life, when we're doing what He wants us to do, know that He will bring about His victory. Not ours, but His. As wicked as St. Louis is, and you look at it, you see the news, you see that it's controlled by Satan and his workers, but God is greater than all of that. And God can work a great work even here in St. Louis, using us. So, yes. Yes. That's right. That's exactly right. Yeah. Yeah, and as we go through, we're going to see an example of God using a man in a marvelous way to bring about victory even in these overwhelming odds. So we too need to sort of keep our eyes focused on God and what God wants us to do and not allow other things to sidetrack us, to turn us another direction. Verse 8. Verse 8 reads, "And he tarried 7 days according to the set time that Samuel had appointed, but Samuel came not to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him." So, as you tie verse 8 to what's happened already, the people were scattered. Many of them were hiding. Those that were with Saul were trembling. He, being Saul, tarried 7 days according to the time that Samuel had appointed. Now, we later find out that God had instructed Samuel, and Samuel had instructed Saul to wait here. Now, this was not the first time that Samuel had told Saul, wait in Gilgal for 7 days. If you go back to chapter 10 and verse 8, when Saul was anointed, he was instructed then, stay at Gilgal for 7 days and wait, and I will come. Here, the difference is he tarried 7 days according to set time that Samuel had appointed, but Samuel came not to Gilgal, and the people were scattered from him. So this support that Saul supposedly had was breaking down. Verse 9 says, "And Saul said, bring hither a burnt offering to me and peace offerings, and he offered the burnt offering." Now, what's the problem with that? He was not the one that was supposed to offer the offering. In fact, Israel was instructed when they came out that, and God established the priesthood, that they were not to offer those sacrifices, those specific sacrifices were to be offered by those men designated of God. So, he didn't want that authority usurped. However, we see here Saul taking it on himself. Bring hither a burnt offering to me and peace offerings, and he offered the burnt offering. Verse 10, "And it came to pass that as soon as he had made an end offering the burnt offering, behold, Samuel came, and Saul went out to meet him, that he might salute him. And Samuel said, What hast thou done? And Saul said, Because I saw that the people were scattered from me, and that thou camest not within the days appointed, and that the Philistines gathered themselves together at Michmash. I wish I knew how to pronounce that right. Therefore said I, the Philistines will come down now upon me to Gilgal, and I have not made supplication unto the Lord. I forced myself, therefore, and offered a burnt offering." So, in these verses, what are they telling us? He's making excuses. He was told to wait. But over the course of the 7 days, the enemy sitting there, his own troops, their confidence breaking, confidence, they didn't have confidence, did they? But they were falling apart before his eyes, or that's what he saw. And so what did he do? Instead of waiting on the Lord, waiting on the Lord's servant, he tried to move ahead of the Lord. When in fact, how long was it before Samuel actually arrived? Yeah, it was, we're not told specifically on the 7th day, but it was right as soon as he had offered those burnt offerings. Have we ever done that? Have you ever jumped the gun on something? You know, I wish I'd have waited just another. You know, I find that with glue and paint, I get anxious. Have you ever waited for paint to dry? I have. Not very well. And I get a little anxious, and I move forward. Glue, I move forward before it's actually set, and what happens? Breaks apart, and you start all over. When we don't wait upon the Lord, we're out of sync. And it's not going to work out well. So what does he say? As Sister Helen said, he begins to blame. We oftentimes will justify our own disobedience to God's instructions in our lives, just like Saul. Someone had to do it. Someone had to say it. He forced himself to do it. We take on ourselves the thing that we should not have and justify it in our own minds. Now, in speaking to Samuel, do you think Samuel bought it? No. In fact, we know Samuel didn't buy it. He knew better. But the problem is, we've justified it to ourselves. We've convinced ourselves of that we weren't at fault. And what happens? We walk away unrepentant, unjustified, or self-justified, and without any remorse. And that's what Saul does here. He says, "Therefore I said, the Philistines will come down upon me to Gilgal." Who was it about? It was about him, Samuel, not God's people, and certainly not God. And I have not made supplication unto the Lord. Well, even if he had made supplication unto the Lord, what value would have it had? He was already in disobedience. Can we really worship God when we're in disobedience? When we're refusing, when we're rejecting? We have to be in God's will. And it begins with repentance in our lives. Verses 13 and 14 says, "And Samuel said to Saul, Thou hast done foolishly. Thou hast not kept the commandment of the Lord thy God, which he commanded thee. For now would the Lord have established thy kingdom upon Israel forever. But now thy kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart, and the Lord hath commanded him to be captain over his people, because thou hast not kept that which the Lord commanded." So what's Samuel telling him here? Yeah, no one in your family is going to follow you. Your reign is over at the end of your reign. Your lineage will not continue. God, in the indication here, is that God was ready to establish a dynasty through Saul's lineage, his line. But what did his disobedience cause? That's right. When we are disobedient to God, do you think we also lose blessings of God, opportunities? Does it cost? And oftentimes, we think of the cost in relationship to ourselves. Why? Because we're so inwardly focused. But too oftentimes, the cost is beyond us and to our children and their children Our failure to make sure our children are here and learning about Jesus Christ all but ensures that they're not going to learn about him, because the world's not going to teach them the truth about it. And if you don't, they're not going to get it anyway. And so we're ensuring that those blessings that could have been to you and to them are lost. God desires to bless us, but what does he require to do that? Our obedience. Our obedience. And that's not a foreign concept to us, is it? What do we expect out of our children? When we give them an instruction, a command, what do we expect? Obedience. Now, it may be that they've been disobedient so much, so often, that maybe our expectation has lowered, and we don't expect it, but we should. And maybe God, because we continue in disobedience, maybe God doesn't expect it. But if we are children of his, there are consequences. And he will attempt to bring us back into obedience with his will. What does God look for? Verse 14 says, "But now the kingdom shall not continue. The Lord hath sought him a man after his own heart." That's what God wants. What does God want from you? The same thing. He wants us to be people after his own heart, seeking his will, seeking what he wants of us. Now, in this particular case, who was that man that God knew about, but at this point, David, that Samuel and Saul didn't know who was? Verses 15 through 23. "And Samuel arose and gat him up from Gilgal unto Gibeah of Benjamin. And Saul numbered the people that were present with him, about 600 men. So he started out with 2,000. We've not gone to battle, but he's already lost more than 2/3 of the men that he had with him. He's down to 600 men. Verse 16, "Saul and Jonathan his son and the people that were present with them abode in Gibeah of Benjamin." So they had joined forces. Saul had gone on to Gibeah, again his hometown, whereas Samuel, in verse 15, went from Gilgal. He went to Gilgal, from Gilgal to Gibeah, but they didn't go together, evidently. Verse 16, "Saul, Jonathan his son, the people that were present with them, abode in Gibeah of Benjamin, but the Philistines encamped at Michmash, and the spoilers came out of the camp of the Philistines in 3 companies." What's a spoiler? The term means destroyer. These would have been bands that were sent out scoping the land and basically encompassing the army that Saul and Jonathan had round about and securing. Nobody could come in, nobody could go out. There was no receiving of supplies that might be needed for the military. There were no other soldiers that could come in or other people. They were just locked in. They cut off Saul's army from the rest of Israel. No supplies, no reinforcements, and no escape route. Verse 18, "And another company turned the way to Bethhorn." I sort of skipped the last part of 17. "And the spoilers came out of the camp of the Philistines in 3 companies. 1 company turned unto the way that leadeth to Ophrah, unto the land of Shual. And another company turned the way to Beth-horon. And another company turned to the way of the border that looked to the valley of Zeboam toward the wilderness." Now there was no smith found through all the land of Israel. Now I'm a smith, but we weren't there. For the Philistines said, lest the Hebrews make them swords or spears. But all the Israelites went down to the Philistines to sharpen every man his share, and his coulter, and his axe, and his mattock. Yet they had a file for the mattock, for the coulters, for the forks, for the axes, and to sharpen the goads. So it came to pass in the day of battle that there was neither sword nor spear found in the hand of any people that were with Saul and Jonathan, but with, or except, with Saul and with Jonathan his son was there found. So who had swords? Saul and Jonathan. That was it. Now, what is this? There was no smith in the land. It's not talking about the namesake. Yeah, blacksmith. There were none to make weapons of war or any other metal objects. Now, were they able to make metal objects? Yes. They could go to the Philistines, and as they had a need for farming equipment, they could have those things made, but there were no weapons of war that would be made by the Israelites. How much power did the Philistines have over Israel? You sort of get the picture here. Verse 23, and the garrison of the Philistines went out to the passage of Michmash. So, here we see a very dire situation. As Saul and Jonathan look out and they see the massive army of the Philistines, what hope, what reason did they have to assume that they had any chance at victory? Again, relying on themselves, and that seems to be the situation that they're in right now. Relying on themselves, there was no reason to think that they would have any success in battle with them. That brings us to chapter 14. Comments or questions? Beginning in verse 1, now it came to pass upon the day that Jonathan, the son of Saul, said unto the young man that bare his armor, Come, let us go over to the Philistines' garrison that is on the other side. But he told not his father. And Saul tarried in the uttermost part of Gibeah, the outer area, under a pomegranate tree, which is in Migron, and the people that were with him were about 600 men. And Ahiah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh, wearing an ephod, and the people knew not that Jonathan was gone. And between the passages by which Jonathan sought to go over unto the Philistines' garrison, there was a sharp rock on the one side and a sharp rock on the other side. And the name of the one was Bozez, and the name of the other Sina. The forefront of the one was situated northward over against Michmash, and the other southward over against Gibeah. So what do we have happening here in chapter 14? What was Saul doing? He found him a pleasant place. Yeah. Paul was in a pleasant place. Saul was in a... I finally get Paul right, don't I? But in the wrong place. Saul was under a pomegranate tree, relaxing. What's Jonathan doing? He's ready to go. He has confidence. In spite of the overwhelming odds, he's ready to take on the Philistines. And what does he do? He says unto the young man that bare his armor, Come, let us go over to the Philistines' garrison that is on the other side. Now, how many men are in a garrison? About 20. About 20. So Jonathan says to his armor bearer, Come with me. We're going to go over to that garrison. 20 soldiers. Fighting men, well equipped, because the Philistines had the resources to do so. He says, let's go over here. Now, Saul, under the pomegranate tree, verse 3 tells us that Ahiah, the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother, the son of Phinehas, the son of Eli, the Lord's priest in Shiloh, wearing an ephod, the people knew not that Jonathan was gone. So it tells us that the priest is there from Shiloh, Ahiah, but does it indicate that Saul utilizes him anyway? Goes to him? Asks for an inquiry? No, there's no mention of it here. It doesn't mean that he didn't, but based on what we've seen so far, I question that Saul inquired. He had the opportunity, could have gone to God and asked God, what do we do, Lord? But I don't see any evidence of that going on. The people didn't know Jonathan and his armor bearer were gone. And verse 4 tells us that they went through the passages, rocks on one side, rocks on the other side, gives us the name, the location, and the forefront situated northward over against Michmash and the other southward over against Gibeah. From there, verse 6 says, and Jonathan said to the young man that bare his armor, come and let us go over unto the garrison of these uncircumcised. It may be that the Lord will work for us, for there is no restraint to the Lord to save by many or by few. Now, the first thing that's odd is Jonathan, talking to his armor bearer, says, come, let us go over unto the garrison of these uncircumcised. Now, typically, you would expect him to say to the garrison of the enemy. Why is he mentioning uncircumcised? Who? Oh. That's right. Israel is God's people. But these people were the enemies not of Israel, but the enemies of God. Now, don't misunderstand me. They certainly were bringing their wrath against the children of Israel, but who was their wrath against? And in fact, who is the wrath of all lost against? It's against God. What did the Lord say to Samuel when Israel rejected him, his leadership, and demanded a king? That's right. They haven't rejected you. They've rejected me. And that's what Jonathan is recognizing here, is that these were enemies of God. Uncircumcised. Circumcision was a sign of the covenant between God and his people. It may be the Lord will work for us, for there is no restraint. What's that mean? Nothing holding God back to save by many or by few. It does not matter how many we have on our side. If we are on the side of God, then God will deliver the victory according to his will. Verse 7, and his armor bearer said unto him, do all that is in thy heart. I'm going to go back. Did he say that? No. Now, I understand the courage of Jonathan. Jonathan following after God, recognizing God. This young man he's referred to as had enough respect and confidence for Jonathan, and I think the influence of Jonathan had affected him, and he was ready to go and to die, if that was what it called for. He says here, and his armor bearer said unto him, verse 7, do all that is in thine heart, turn thee. Behold, I am with thee according to thy heart. Then said Jonathan, behold, we will pass over unto these men, and we will discover ourselves unto them. So what's he saying? We will discover ourselves unto them. We'll reveal ourselves. We'll let them know that we're here. That's a good battle strategy. Always use that first and foremost. When you go into battle, reveal yourself. Verse 9, if they say thus unto us, wait there, tarry until we come unto you, then we will stand still in our place, and we will not go up to them. So what's he saying here? If they tell us, you wait right there, and we're going to come down, and we'll do battle down there, then what was Jonathan's approach? Do it. He goes on in verse 10, but if they say thus, come up unto us, then we will go up, for the Lord hath delivered them into our hand, and this shall be a sign unto us. Now, when you go into battle, do you want to pick the place of battle, or do you want the enemy to? You want to pick the place of battle. So, yeah, typically on high ground. So, what's Jonathan? Is this a good battle strategy? Let the enemy pick the place? Why in the world would Jonathan do that? He was letting the Lord pick the place. He had full confidence in God that it did not matter. It wasn't by his might or his armor bearers, but it was by the might of the Lord. Too many times we don't have confidence in God and we want to set up the perfect scenario. You know, I don't want to go over here and knock on that door. I don't want to talk to this person. I'll talk to this one because they look like me. They act like me, which is probably not a good thing. You know, we want to pick and choose for ourselves those battles and where they're going to occur and who with, instead of allowing God to guide us and to speak as he leads. Jonathan had full confidence in the Lord. He knew it didn't matter where they fought. It didn't matter that he had to climb up the rocks before he could even get to the place of battle, and that he would be confronted by approximately 20 soldiers, trained soldiers. Did not matter to him. What did matter to him was he was fighting the battle of the Lord. Verse 11 says, and both of them discovered themselves. They showed themselves unto the garrison of the Philistines. And the Philistines said, behold, the Hebrews come forth out of the holes which they had hid themselves. How much credibility had the Hebrews? They refer to them as Hebrews in several places here, in this particular one. The Hebrews come forth out of the holes where they had hid themselves. How much credibility did the Hebrews have with? Not very much. And the men of the garrison answered Jonathan and his armor bearer and said, come up to us and we will show you a thing. We're going to show you how the cow eat the corn. What's some of those other, cliches that we use? That's what they're saying here. Come up after, we'll show you a thing. Continuing in verse 12, and Jonathan said unto his armor bearer, come up after me, for the Lord hath delivered them into the hand of Israel. Did Jonathan lack confidence? Not one bit. But it wasn't pride, it wasn't arrogance, because it wasn't in himself. Too oftentimes we go with pride and arrogance and losing the battle. Too oftentimes that pride and arrogance comes across to other people, and we lose that battle. His pride was in the God of Israel. His confidence was in the God of Israel. Verse 13, and Jonathan climbed up upon his hands and upon his feet, and his armor bearer after him, and they fell before Jonathan, the enemy, and his armor bearer slew after him. And that first slaughter which Jonathan and his armor bearer made was about 20 men, wherein, as it were, a half acre of land, which a yoke of oxen might plow. And there was trembling in the host, in the field, and among all the people, the garrison, and the spoilers, and they also trembled, and the earth quaked, so that it was very great trembling. So Jonathan and his armor bearer go up. By the power of God, they defeat about 20 trained soldiers. But then, what happens from there? Yeah, God took over. Now, God took over from the time that they began to battle, but you see that God goes beyond what Jonathan's intent was. And it says here, there was trembling in the host. This was not the host of Israel. They had gone, just Jonathan and this armor bearer, acting on the Lord's cause, had gone from Israel cowering and trembling to now this great and mighty Philistine army was trembling and cowering. Spoilers, they also trembled, and the earth quaked. So it was a very great trembling. Verse 16. And the watchmen of Saul in Gibeah of Benjamin looked, and behold, the multitude melted away, and they went on beating down one another. So what did the watchmen of Saul see? Yeah, they saw them fighting amongst themselves and melting away. They were, it sounds almost like the account of Sennacherib. When the angel of the Lord defeated 166,000 without any Israelite ever bearing an arm, where they slaughtered themselves. Verse 17, then said Saul unto the people that were with him, number now, and see who is gone from us. So in other words, who's over there fighting this battle? And when they had numbered, behold, Jonathan and his armor-bearer were not there. And Saul said unto Ahiah, who's Ahiah? The priest. He says, bring hither the ark of God, for the ark of God was at that time with the children of Israel. And it came to pass, while Saul talked unto the priest, that the noise that was in the host of the Philistines went on and increased. And Saul said unto the priest, withdraw thine hand. So he tells Ahiah, bring the ark. Why? All of a sudden, he wanted to inquire of God. However, while he's talking to the priest, verse 19 says, the noise that was in the host of the Philistines went on and increased, and Saul said unto the priest, withdraw thy hand. In other words, stop. Wait, hold off. Verse 20, and Saul and all the people that were with him assembled themselves, and they came to the battle, and behold, every man's sword was against his fellow, and there was a very great discomfiture. What's that mean, discomfiture? Slaughter, confusion, it was a mess. Among the Philistines, it was an absolute mess. Confusion. Verse 21, moreover, the Hebrews that were with the Philistines, now who are these people? Well, keep in mind, was all Israel? No. We find that throughout Israel's history, there were those who believed in God, Jehovah, the God of Israel, but there were many that rejected. And there were probably some that were taken captive and were serving, but there were probably also others that were traitorous. Yeah. That's right. That's right. Verse 21 is where we left off. Moreover, the Hebrews that were with Philistines before that time, which went up with them into the camp from the country round about, even they also turned to be with the Israelites. We want to be on the winning side. Pick me, pick me. They want to be with the Israelites that were with Saul and Jonathan. Likewise, all the men of Israel, which had hid themselves in Mount Ephraim. Who were these? They were the cowards, the ones that didn't have enough faith in God. They had hid themselves. When they heard the Philistines fled, even they also followed hard after them in the battle. So the Lord saved Israel that day, and the battle passed over unto Beth-haven. So Saul's army grew from his 600 to who knows how many, but how many was he really able to count on out of that group? Yeah, we saw examples of two. Beyond that, we don't know. It was the Lord that saved Israel. Let me catch up with where I am. Any thoughts, comments, questions? All right. Beginning in verse 24. And the men of Israel were distressed that day, for Saul had adjured the people, saying, Cursed be the man that eateth any food until evening, that I may be avenged on mine enemies. So none of the people tasted any food. Now, this is continuing this battle. They're chasing the fleeing Philistines. And so Saul puts out a curse. Don't eat food. And all they of the land came to a wood, and there was honey upon the ground. And when the people were come into the wood, behold, the honey dropped. But no man put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. What's the problem with this oath? This curse that Paul placed? Yeah, I mean, if you're going to run in a race, what do? You prepare ahead of time, and that's exercise, prepare yourself physically, but it also is to intake sufficient calories, food to help you through the ordeal your body's going to go through. Paul denied them of that. Now, he put a curse on it. And so as the people came to this wood where the honey dropped, no man put his hand to his mouth, for the people feared the oath. Jonathan, not hearing, dipped his staff into it and took just enough to refresh. And then he was told by the people that Saul had put a curse on it. Jonathan recognized the foolishness of the oath, even if Saul did not, and mentions it here in verse 30. How much more? In other words, the victory that God gave to Israel, how much greater victory would it have been had Saul not withheld from the people the ability to refresh and sustain themselves? Anyway, we go on, and as you go through the chapter, you'll find that Saul, at one point, after the victory is done, he inquires who may have broken that vow. And you'll see casting of lots, very similar to Achan, the choosing of Achan, in identifying that it was Jonathan. What's Saul's reaction when he finds out that his firstborn son is the one guilty? Then he must die. It didn't matter that his oath, his curse, was foolish. He was going to follow through in spite of it. And but what saves Jonathan? Well, I think it had to do with the hand of God. But through the people of Israel, they recognized the foolishness of the oath, and they recognized that Jonathan was the one that God had used to bring about that victory. And in spite of Saul's curse, his oath, he went back on it and did not take the life of Jonathan. We didn't get to chapter 15. Chapter 15, probably the best known of the events that followed. Obedience is better than sacrifice. It's better to obey than to sacrifice. Any thoughts, comments, or questions?